Welcome to another episode of Well, Don't Tell the Kids. I'm Janet Lee, your host, and today I'm speaking with my guest, Carol Downs. I want to welcome you to the podcast, Carol.
Thank you so much, Janet. It's a pleasure to be here.
Carol is joining us for our conversation from near Boston, Massachusetts.
Yes, Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, which is a neighborhood in the city of Boston.
How's the weather up there today?
It's beautiful. It snowed a little bit yesterday, so it's really quite wintry and beautiful.
Are you originally from the Midwest? I didn't really realize that. Am I getting this straight?
Yes, I spent my childhood in the kind of rural suburb of Chicago called Barrington, Illinois, and spent a lot of time outside as a kid. And then when we were 10, moved to McLean, Virginia, Northern Virginia, a suburb of D.C., and I went to high school and college in Virginia, Langley High School and University of Virginia. Then I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan for about a year and a half, worked in a restaurant, worked at the University of Michigan. I was living with my boyfriend who was in medical school there. And then I did a summer internship in upstate New York for a couple months where I met my husband, and he was from Boston, so I moved to Boston in 1991, and we got married, and here I am. Yep.
What led your family from outside of Chicago to D.C.?
My dad and his father had founded the Real Estate Research Corporation in Chicago, and my dad is an economist and political scientist, and he got a job as a fellow at the Brookings Institution in D.C., so that's why we moved.
Let's see, you earned your Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And can you just, I'm curious about that. How did you get there?
Well, I guess I've always been kind of a big picture thinker, and in high school I was thinking about the big questions and ended up kind of becoming a fundamentalist Christian. I was in Young Life and kind of went that route in terms of finding big answers. But then when I got to UVA, I started taking religion classes. I took a Buddha class, I took philosophy classes, and realized that mindset of the fundamentalist Christianity that I was within was just way too narrow, and kind of moved on from that. And I grew up in a household where we did a lot of intellectual arguing and debating, I would guess. So kind of a natural to study philosophy, which is really you learn how to argue positions and defend positions in writing, and it's really about logical thinking and reasoning. And I luckily did not have to worry about loans, so I was never very career oriented. I just was studying what I was interested in, and I also had the good fortune of having making some very feminist friends early on at UVA, and so that kind of opened up my eyes to women's rights and feminism, and so that was a big part of my time at UVA too, thinking about those issues. The other two things at UVA that were really formative for me were I was a volunteer on the weekends through Madison House, so I would work. Our local community partner was the Albemarle Housing Improvement Program, and the students would go on the weekends. We would go out and paint these houses that the program was in the process of renovating, and that now, full circle, 40 years later, I'm on the board of the Boston Planning and Development Agency, and we're, which is all about building housing. And so who knew? Who knew that was going to be something? And then the other thing I did at UVA was I worked in the dining hall. I really wanted to have a job. My parents didn't really want me to have a job, but I really wanted to have a job at school. And so I worked, I think, all 4 years or maybe 3 years in the dining hall, and now I own a restaurant. So I think my message to the younger listeners is you just never know. Follow your instincts, and you just never know, what you're doing now may be informing what you're going to do later, but you don't even know it, so.
Oh, I wanted to ask before we move on. So do you have a favorite philosopher? Think way back.
Yeah, I mean, I have a really horrible memory. So
okay.
I think I really liked studying ethics and moral decision making. And there was a woman who wrote a book. She's not an ancient philosopher. She's a modern thinker. Her name is Carol Gilligan, and she wrote a book about moral decision making in girls and women versus boys and men. And that to me was one of the most interesting books I read.
What is her? Yeah.
I don't know if she's a philosopher. She's more of a sociologist, probably. But
in Boston, you are co-founder of a restaurant and the general manager of Bella Luna Restaurant and Milky Way Lounge. So can you describe the ethos of that? It sounds like it's more than just a place to get a burger.
Yes. So like most things I'm doing, I happened into this. So when I moved to Boston, my husband was a youth worker who worked for the city of Boston, and he was working with this other woman who ran a nonprofit organization called Citizens for Safety, which was working to reduce violence in Boston. At the time, the murder rate was really high, and so my husband essentially got me a job working with her, and she initially offered me like a 3-hour-a-week job, and then immediately we clicked, and so I just became her executive assistant and did grant writing and stuff. So she and I worked together for a couple of years, and I was really just kind of the administrative person, and she's an amazing community organizer, and we did the first gun buyback program in Boston. We organized a soccer marathon for peace to raise money for youth programs reducing violence, and so we were all kind of nonprofit people. And she left that organization, and then we had our son. So I was home taking care of our son, and she met some guys playing soccer and decided to open a restaurant in the neighborhood because one of the fundamental roots of preventing violence is creating jobs and having economic development at a local level. So she thought, well, I want to create a small business. She was a single parent. Her daughter was, I think, 10 or 11 at the time. And so she was really the founder and visionary around the restaurant. And then she invited my husband and I to come in as founding partners. And we had no money. We were all renting our homes. We had no ability to get a loan. So another friend of hers said, why don't you just go to all your friends and ask them for like $1,000? So we basically did crowdsourcing before crowdsourcing or crowdfunding or the internet existed. This was 1993. So we went to all our friends and said, hey, you want to invest in this restaurant? $1,000. And we scraped together, I think, $55,000, which was not enough. But we just, and then we opened a little 19-seat pizza place. And Kathy, who was running it, had never even worked in a restaurant. She was just really good at startup, and she had this vision for this place. And we were busy from day one, and had no idea what we were doing. So I'd say even now, 24 years later, I'm still learning. But so she really ran the restaurant, and then we expanded a couple times. And then underneath us in the basement of this building was a candlepin bowling alley that the landlord was running. I know, it's hard to believe. There's this huge candlepin bowling alley. Was running it and then not successfully. So then it was just sitting there empty and unused. And we wanted a space for the people waiting to eat in our restaurant to hang out, have a drink, and maybe listen to some music. There was a cool bookstore that opened next to us, bookstore and record store. So our customers would go over there while they were waiting, and then we would go find them. But we wanted to add music to our business. Right. So we took over this. It was a huge space, like a 9,000 square foot space with 10 lanes of candlepin bowling and these old lawnmower engines running the bowling machine, pin setting machines. I mean, it was old school. And we knocked out a couple lanes. We put in a bar. We put in a stage. And we created the Milky Way Lounge and Lanes. And that was the wild, wild west. We were doing 7 nights of dinner, bowling, parties, bar. We had pool tables. and entertainment. And then all the food was made upstairs, and our servers would run it down the stairs, and all the drinks were made downstairs, and the servers would run them up the stairs. I mean, it was crazy and big and complicated, and we did that. So then what happened at the in 2007 or 8, we were coming to the end of a 15-year lease, and the landlord said, wanted to raise our rent basically 100%, basically double our rent. Yeah. And so we were facing either closing. We couldn't pay it. So we were facing either closing or relocating, and we were very fortunate. After many months of stressful searching, we found a spot in an old brewery in the same neighborhood that was undeveloped and raw space, concrete, full of pigeons and snow. Like it had been abandoned since the 60s. And we moved into that space. But in the move, we had to shrink our business. We lost the bowling, and we lost the pool, and the entertainment side of our business shrank. But we were able to save 45 jobs that would have otherwise been lost if we had closed. And so that was a really big, difficult thing that we had to do, was relocate and borrow a lot of money to build out this new space. But it's very beautiful, and we've been here now for 8.5 years, and we're still going. It's all about survival, really.
Yeah, really remarkable. So how long on these were 2 phases. So in the 2 phases, how long did it take for the ramp up, or when you started to break even? I'm just curious.
We still just break even. We're basically
okay. All right. Okay.
Seriously, we're a mission-driven restaurant. Our mission is to reinvest in the community and use our business to support nonprofits, and our mission is to be a place where everyone feels comfortable. So inclusivity is a big part of our mission, and for LGBTQ community, people of color, Latino community, like we try to be the place where everyone feels comfortable and can be here and enjoy themselves. And we're not a bottom line driven business, is how I would put it, which is challenging.
It sounds like your place is safe space, place to to relax and to have a good meal and to enjoy the company of others. Or do they just come there and they're like, I just want to just relax. We're not going to talk about politics at all and just leave that at the door?
I think communities that have traditionally sought out safe spaces greatly appreciate any safe spaces that exist. So, as human rights has become more mainstream, at least here in Boston, then there is a slight less need for specifically safe spaces, let's say like a lesbian dance night but because now people feel more welcome just generally in more places. I think the Orlando shooting in that nightclub really hit us hard, because that could have been our space. And we, as the managers of this business, work really hard to keep it inclusive. What the trends that are happening here are more like gentrification. So inclusivity becomes something you have to protect and be strategic about, because the tide of people moving into Boston is not necessarily very diverse, to be honest. So I think that's our new angle, is how do we stay inclusive when the tide of change is not as inclusive and is higher income. But in terms of people's state of mind, I think there's an enormous amount of anxiety in communities of color and LGBTQ communities, and anyone who's working on the environment or parks or housing or any nonprofits that get federal support, which is most parts of the government, schools, everybody's reliant on some degree of federal support. So I think there's a huge amount of anxiety is what my answer to your question is. But and there's a huge amount of anxiety in the younger generation also. So I think it's tough. So we want to be that place where people can find relief from all the anxiety out there.
Yeah, you're leading into this a bit. I know that you are an outspoken advocate on certain issues and causes, so I'm wondering if there's one that most significant or in the forefront of your mind or that you'd like to highlight.
Well, the value of places like restaurants, theaters, places where the public goes to experience art, let's say, or food, or music, sports, all of those activities are unifying activities, and they're third places, I guess is the word I would use. They're gathering places, and anybody can come in and be there. And so there is a natural mix of people, and so I think it's very important to have and maintain those places because it's where people just naturally go because they're interested in something that isn't outright political and isn't outright religious, and it doesn't define you what movie you go to, So I think those activities are really important, and art, music, places that are unifying. It's keeping those third spaces accessible for everybody, affordable for everybody, and welcoming to everybody is really important. That's why the mass shootings are so directly attack that sense of safety in public gathering spaces, and that's why they're so horrible. One of the reasons.
Well, it's easy to argue still when you're breaking bread, but there's something about the commonality of we're all human.
Yeah.
Try to talk about it without throwing the bread all over the place.
Right.
Let's see, the holidays are coming up, so do you have a particular event coming up that fosters a sense of community?
Well, we host a lot of holiday parties for different groups. We have schools coming here and businesses, and so there's a lot of people coming here and having their holiday parties. And then we're having a rumba New Year's Eve dinner, so it's kind of Central and South American food with a DJ. So that should be fun. And then our New Year's Eve show is actually called Resist Dance. And it's Resist Dance. So there's a slight soft political message there. And that's two of our DJs, one who runs a night called Boyfriends, which is a gay men's dance night, and another woman who runs a queer night. They team up and do our New Year's Eve. But we're turning 25 next year as a business, so we're planning a bunch of events around that, and one of which is going to be we're calling it the Moonstruck Series. We're going to offer our space to different local nonprofit organizations so they can have a fundraiser here almost free of charge or at very, very low cost. And then the concept is to do 12 of them, one on each full moon. We'll see how that pans out, but that's the goal right now.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Any shout-outs to these particular nonprofit groups?
There's a lot. There's something like over 300 nonprofits in Jamaica Plain in our neighborhood alone. It's like kind of a hotbed of activism and social justice.
You described your journey sort of happenstance and not completely planned. So any advice to young folks who want to venture in? I mean, this restaurant world, we know how competitive it is in startup, being an entrepreneur.
Well, I'll give a pitch for working in restaurants. I think working in restaurants is a fantastic way to learn about all different kinds of people, learn about customer service and dealing with the public. It's a way of learning how to present yourself professionally, no matter what is happening to yourself personally. Any customer service position, you have to learn how to smile and be polite and kind of control your emotions, which I think is a really valuable skill. Multitasking, it's very hard work. Everyone in any restaurant you go into is working really, really hard. So I think it's a really, really valuable type of work, hospitality, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant or a cafe or a movie theater, anywhere you're working with the public and working with food, you have to make sure everyone's food is safe to consume. If you're dealing with alcohol, you have to make sure people are safe consuming alcohol. There's just a lot. There's a lot to it, and it requires a lot of different skills. So I'm a big believer in working in restaurants and the value of that type of work. And it's a good place for young people to get jobs because it's one of the fields where you can start young and inexperienced And then once you know how to work in a restaurant, you can work anywhere. Really, it's a very mobile skill set. So I would encourage that. And I would also say, if opportunities come along, say yes. Say yes to opportunities that come along. And I also think volunteering, my whole career has been really connected to just volunteering in some way that I find interesting. I don't view it as something to put on the resume. It's like, I want to do this work. I have time. I'm going to do this work. And then it has always led to other cool opportunities for me. So I strongly encourage people to volunteer.
Well, that's a very hopeful report from the Boston area. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I think, like I said, there's a lot of anxiety, and this, this whole internet, the level of information and the number of urgent messages that are being shouted at us all the time from different sources it's unmanageable. We're not designed to be able to care and think about and take action on every message that is being aimed at us. So we have to take control of our own consumption of news, whether it's news or whatever. If it's making us anxious, I think we need to limit it. I consume too much of it myself, but I have a little bit of a Teflon, but I think the messages are just too urgent. They're too many, and it's the entire world we're supposed to be understanding and caring about, and it's too much. It's better to limit that and focus on the people we know. The 100 or 150 people who we actually can impact in our lives, focus on those folks.
Well, we also have the added layer now of vetting the sources.
It makes me feel a little crazy sometimes. So then I'm like, okay, this is too much. I got to focus on the people I know, my family, my colleagues, my employees, my friends. It's hard. It's really hard, and it's new. It's not what anyone has experienced in human history before this. So it's new. And I think there's a lot of good things about it. I think there's a lot of barriers being broken down, and I think the next generation is just much more accepting of people from all over the world and all different viewpoints. And so I have great hope, actually, for the next generation. But I think they're also experiencing a lot of anxiety. So change is a constant. Everything is always changing.
I want to thank you for giving a little glimpse into your neighborhood, Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you, Janet, for this opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Carol Downs, she's the general manager at Bella Luna Restaurant and Milky Way Lounge. And I want to thank you all for listening. I'm Janet Lee, and please stay tuned for more episodes of Well, Don't Tell the Kids.